World War II is perhaps the most brutal and horrifying war in human history. Spanning 6 years, the conflict is filled with countless infamous events, from the Holocaust by Nazi Germany and war crimes committed by Imperial Japan to massive Allied campaigns and deadly battles that left millions dead or wounded. However, one of the most infamous and haunting events was undoubtedly the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States in August 1945. These are the first, and so far the only, times nuclear weapons have been used in actual warfare. Their consequences were devastating, casting a long shadow over generations of humanity. In 1945, World War II was approaching its end. Allied forces launched massive campaigns on both Eastern and Western fronts in Europe, gradually pushing Axis forces back. On May 8, 1945, after the fall of Berlin, Nazi Germany signed an unconditional surrender, ending the war in Europe. However, the war in the Pacific raged on, with fierce battles between the Allies and Imperial Japan. After devastating defeats in Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and relentless bombings of Japanese cities, it seemed likely that the war would end within the year. Yet Japan refused to surrender, despite mounting civilian casualties. By then, 66 Japanese cities had been bombed. Around 1.7 million people lost their homes, and hundreds of thousands were killed or wounded. The napalm bombing of Tokyo on March 9, 1945, alone caused at least 100,000 deaths. Still, just 2 days later, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo expressed the belief, shared by many senior officials, that the Japanese people would grow accustomed to daily bombings and become even more united and determined. In reality, the Japanese military was on the brink of collapse. Its Navy and Air Force were nearly wiped out, its industrial base devastated, and the country tightly blockaded. With few weapons left, Japan relied on its last advantage, the samurai spirit, a willingness to die for the emperor. Kamikaze suicide pilots, though sacrificing over 3,900 men, inflicted heavy damage on the U.S. Navy. By July 1945, Japan still had 12,725 aircraft, most of which were intended for suicide missions. The military planned for all-out resistance, mobilizing 2.35 million troops from 53 divisions and 25 independent brigades, and over 28 million civilians, males aged 15 to 60, females aged 17 to 45, armed with whatever weapons were available, from rifles to bows and spears. Japan also had around 3 million troops stationed abroad, mostly in Manchuria and Korea. According to their plan, if the mainland fell, these forces would retreat to Manchuria and continue the fight. The Japanese government believed that if they inflicted enough casualties on the Americans during an invasion of the homeland, U.S. public opinion would turn against the war and force the government to negotiate. In such a scenario, Japan hoped to propose ceasefire terms favorable to itself. On the Allied side, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff submitted to President Truman a plan to invade Japan called Operation Downfall. This strategy consisted of 2 phases, Operation Olympic and Operation Hornet, beginning with prolonged carpet bombing by U.S. Army Air Forces from bases in China and Korea. The U.S. projected at least 100,000 casualties during Operation Olympic and 250,000 during Operation Hornet. However, the successful test of the first atomic bomb, codenamed Trinity, on July 16, 1945, provided a faster and more devastating alternative to force Japan's unconditional surrender: nuclear attack. Shortly afterward, from July 17th to August 2nd, representatives from the Allied powers, the Soviet Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom, convened at the Potsdam Conference to discuss key matters for ending the war, including how to defeat Imperial Japan quickly. On July 26th, the US, UK, and Republic of China issued the Potsdam Declaration, essentially an ultimatum demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. It read, "We call upon the government of Japan to proclaim now the unconditional surrender of all its armed forces. The alternative for Japan is prompt and utter destruction." Japan received the declaration the same day. Within its leadership, responses varied. While the civilian government offered no official reply, the militarist faction considered the ultimatum arrogant and urged immediate rejection. On July 28th, Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki stated that he had no comment on the Potsdam Declaration, a diplomatic dismissal. Japan chose to continue fighting. This solidified America's decision. The atomic bomb would be used to end the war swiftly. The situation in the Pacific and Japan's defiance led to the critical question: where should the bomb be dropped? In spring 1945, the U.S. formed a target committee of senior military officials and scientists to determine the ideal location. The primary objectives were to shock Japan into surrender and to demonstrate the power of the new weapon to the world. Historian Alex Wellerstein noted that at the time, U.S. officials debated whether the target should be a major city, a military installation, or a non-lethal demonstration to intimidate without casualties. Physicist Edward Teller argued that the only way for people to understand the gravity of this new weapon was to witness its true effect in battle, as a warning for future wars. By May 1945, the Target Committee shortlisted Kyoto, Hiroshima, Yokohama, and Kokura. They rejected purely military sites due to the bomb's potential to miss small, isolated targets. The psychological impact was considered paramount. The first use of the bomb had to resonate across the globe. Kyoto, Japan's ancient capital and cultural center, was initially included but later removed from the list out of humanitarian and cultural concern. Meanwhile, Hiroshima was chosen for its strategic military value and large population. Tokyo was excluded because it had already been devastated by the napalm bombing on March 9, 1945. The U.S. feared a strong backlash from the international community if they destroyed an ancient cultural center, so they removed Kyoto from the target list. The primary target became Hiroshima, followed by secondary options like Kokura and Nagasaki, in case Japan still refused to surrender. At the time of the bombing, Hiroshima was both a military and industrial hub. It hosted the headquarters of the 5th Division, 2nd General Army under Field Marshal Hada Shunraku, and served as a major logistical, communications, and weapons assembly center for the Japanese military. Another key reason for targeting Hiroshima, according to General Carl Spaatz, was that the city had no known prisoner of war camps. For these reasons, Washington confirmed Hiroshima as target number 1. On the morning of August 6, 1945, 3B, 29 Superfortress bombers appeared over Hiroshima. 2 carried observation equipment, while the third, Enola Gay, carried the atomic bomb. At 8 a.m., Hiroshima's radar detected a small number of planes and did not sound the alarm. At 8:15, Enola Gay released the bomb named Little Boy, which exploded at about 600 meters above ground. Its blast yield was equivalent to 13,000 tons of TNT. An estimated 90,000 people died instantly, with tens of thousands more dying later from burns, radiation sickness, and trauma. The blast radius was 1.6 kilometers, and the firestorm covered 4.4 square kilometers. About 90% of buildings were destroyed or severely damaged. By December 1945, the death toll had risen to 140,000, with hundreds more dying in the following decades due to radiation exposure. Following the bombing, the U.S. issued a final warning, declaring, "If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth." On August 8th, the U.S. dropped 6 million leaflets across 47 Japanese cities with populations over 100,000, warning of the atomic bomb's destructive power, equivalent to 2,000 B-29 bombers attacking at once, and urging civilians to demand the emperor end the war. Yet, the Japanese government made no response to the Potsdam Declaration. Internal leaders were still debating 4 conditions for surrender, including retaining the emperor, handling disarmament themselves, avoiding occupation, and managing war crimes internally. Meanwhile, on August 5th, Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov informed Japan that the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact was void. Then, Shortly after midnight on August 9th, the Soviet Union declared war and launched a full-scale assault on the Guangdong Army in Manchuria. 4 hours later, Tokyo received the Soviet declaration of war. With Japan still refusing to surrender, the US resolved to drop the second atomic bomb, this time on Nagasaki, a key naval port and industrial center in southern Japan. The city had factories producing munitions, ships, and war equipment, and had mostly been spared from previous large-scale bombings. On August 9th, the B-29 bomber boxcar took off carrying the bomb named Fat Man. At 7:50 a.m., air raid sirens sounded in Nagasaki but were soon canceled due to the appearance of only 2 B-29s. By 10:53 a.m., no new alarm was issued, as the Japanese assumed it was only a reconnaissance mission. At 11:01 a.m., the bomb was dropped over the industrial valley and exploded 43 seconds later, an altitude of 469 meters, with a yield of 21,000 tons of TNT. At the time of detonation, there were approximately 200,000 people in the city. However, due to a hurried release, the second bomb exploded between two main targets, the steel and arms factory in the north and the torpedo plant in the south. Had it fallen slightly more southward, the city's commercial and residential districts would have suffered much heavier damage. This partially explains why, despite being more powerful, the Nagasaki bomb caused less destruction than the one in Hiroshima. Still, around 70,000 people died instantly, with tens of thousands more injured. The blast radius was 1.6 kilometers, and fire stretched as far as 3.2 kilometers to the south. Combined, the two atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed at least 160,000 people instantly, and the total number of deaths from radiation and injuries afterward remains uncountable. The US had even planned to deploy more atomic bombs if Japan continued to refuse surrender. However, the two tragedies forced Emperor Hirohito and several Japanese leaders to reconsider their stance. Hours before the second bomb was dropped, Japan's Supreme War Council met to discuss whether to accept the Potsdam Declaration. The military faction continued to oppose surrender. On the evening of August 9th, after hearing news of the Nagasaki bombing, Emperor Hirohito summoned the council again, insisting that Japan should surrender, on the condition that the imperial throne and the line of succession be preserved. The government immediately communicated this condition to the US. The next day, US Secretary of State James Burns stated that no special treatment should be given to the emperor. But Secretary of War Henry Stimson argued that only the emperor had the authority to order Japanese forces to surrender, which would avoid unnecessary bloodshed and limit Soviet expansion in the Pacific. The US eventually responded that while Japan could not choose its future form of government, the emperor and imperial family's safety would be guaranteed. Meanwhile, Japan's military leadership still refused to accept defeat, leading to continued disputes. Finally, on August 14, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced his decision to accept the Potsdam Declaration. He even agreed to record a speech to broadcast nationwide, something unprecedented in Japanese history. However, the hardline military faction attempted a coup that night, aiming to prevent the emperor's surrender speech from being broadcast. They misled the 2nd Imperial Guard Regiment into storming the palace and tried to destroy the recording. Fortunately, the emperor, Lord Keeper Kido, and other loyalists hid the recording, and the rebels failed to find it. When loyal forces arrived, the coup leader, Major Kenji Hatanaka, and several conspirators committed suicide. At noon on August 15th, Japanese radio stations broadcast the emperor's surrender message, urging all armed forces to lay down their weapons. On August 17th, surrender orders were issued to all Japanese troops at home and abroad. On the morning of August 28th, the first unit of the U.S. 11th Airborne Division landed on Japanese soil, marking the start of the American military occupation. In the afternoon of August 30th, General Douglas MacArthur established a temporary command center in Yokohama, later moving it to Tokyo. On September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Under MacArthur's supervision, Japanese Foreign Minister Shigemitsu Mamoru and General Yashijiro Yamizu, Chief of Staff, officially signed the instrument of unconditional surrender. World War II was officially over. Although the atomic bombings played a crucial role in ending World War II quickly and avoiding many bloody battles in the Pacific, the decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki remains one of the most controversial military actions in history. Opposition typically centers around two main arguments. Morally, the bombings caused massive civilian casualties, which many see as inhumane and unethical. Militarily, critics argue the bombings were unnecessary, as Japan was already on the verge of surrender and conventional bombings had already weakened the country significantly. Numerous individuals and organizations have labeled the act as a war crime and even a crime against humanity. Two notable critics were Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, the very scientists who had previously urged President Roosevelt in 1939 to pursue nuclear research. Szilard later argued, suppose Germany had developed 2 atomic bombs and used them on New York. After their defeat, would anyone hesitate to condemn such an act as a war crime and hang the perpetrators? 7 scientists involved in the Manhattan Project, led by Dr. James Franck, submitted a memorandum to President Truman's Interim Committee in May 1945, stating, "If the United States becomes the first to use this weapon of mass destruction, we will lose the moral support of the world and ignite an arms race that will hinder future arms control agreements." Professor Peter Kuznick, director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, said, "Truman knew he was beginning an era of annihilation. It wasn't just a war crime, it was a crime against humanity." Some, like historian Mark Alecchio of Cornell University, believe the true motive was to intimidate the Soviet Union rather than just defeat Japan. Even several high-ranking U.S. generals questioned the necessity of the bomb. General Dwight D. Eisenhower later wrote in his memoir, "I felt Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. Using such a weapon to shock the world was wrong." Fleet Admiral William D. Leahy, General Carl Spaatz, Lieutenant General Claire Chennault, and other senior officers and intelligence staff shared similar views. Admiral William Halsey stated, "The atomic bomb didn't materially help our war against Japan. The Japanese were already beaten and ready to surrender." On the other hand, many supported the decision. They argued, the bombings ended the war months earlier, saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Had the Allies launched Operations Olympic and Cornet, they could have faced over 1.2 million casualties, with at least 267,000 deaths. The Soviet offensive in Manchuria couldn't alone bring about Japan's surrender. From February 1945, the war was costing 200,000 civilian lives each month in Asia, and conventional bombing killed over 100,000 civilians per month in Japan. In this view, prolonging the war would have only increased suffering, while the atomic bombings quickly ended the war in Asia, liberated millions in occupied territories, and prevented further unnecessary bloodshed. In conclusion, though the morality of using atomic bombs remains hotly debated, their role in ending World War II is undeniable. However, the aftermath of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not end quickly. In fact, their consequences still linger to this day. The survivors of the bombings are known as hibakusha, a Japanese term meaning bomb-affected people. As of 2023, hundreds of thousands of hibakusha still live in Japan, many of whom continue to suffer from severe health problems, including cancer, heart disease, and complications linked to radiation exposure. The memorials in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, along with the voices of the victims, stand as eternal reminders to humanity of the catastrophic danger posed by nuclear weapons. Weapons capable of wiping out entire civilizations in an instant. The story you've just read covers the background, events, and lasting consequences of the horrifying tragedies at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what do you think about the United States' decision to drop the atomic bombs? Was it truly necessary? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below.